As one of the creators of Uyghur Resistance, I especially want to implore everyone here today to first and foremost direct their solidarity efforts to First Nations people in so-called Australia, because meaningful decolonial work has to start with the lands on which we each reside, and as settlers, we are all complicit in the ongoing colonial project here. Thank you all so much for being here today for the Sydney launch of our book, Uyghur Resistance, and for our event, Solidarity is a Verb. I am so proud to be presenting our book to you all, and I am especially proud to be doing so through the lens of solidarity. Uyghur Resistance is a collection of photos, essays, and testimonies that seek to platform and showcase the diverse and often unexpected ways in which the Uyghur diaspora practices resistance against ongoing genocide. And when I look back on the long and trying process of creating this book, solidarity really shines through as a common thread from the very inception of this project. Our book is self-published, and we've only been able to bring this grassroots project to life because over 800 people around the world donated to support us. People from Australia, Taiwan, the Netherlands, Pakistan, the United States, the United Kingdom, and even China donated their money so that we could go to print. At our NAM launch event, we had a solidarity wall where people were invited to write words of support. And by the end of our month-long exhibition, the wall was littered with solidarity from in English, in Arabic, Korean, and Chinese, from the strained, squiggled handwriting of children to fluid calligraphy. And the solidarity that goes into Uyghur Resistance, the book, isn't just in our supporters, but it's also in our creators. Our book is the product of 4 years of collaboration between Uyghur people and our allies. And as an Uyghur person, I myself could never have single-handedly produced something like this. And so our photographer and publisher, Sam, our producer, Kate, and our designer poured so much of their talent and hard work as allies into this book. And that is why we are able to showcase it to you all today. But most importantly, the most important thread of solidarity within Uyghur Resistance is the purpose of our book, because that is a message that has resonated with so many other communities around the world. We created this book for a simple reason: to show the world who the Uyghur people are in our own words, on our own terms, and for our own sake. And we had to do that because unfortunately, the Uyghur people have been introduced to the world through the prism of the atrocities that have been committed against us, as opposed to through the hospitality of our culture, the richness of our lineage, the beauty of our literature and traditional handicrafts. And that's a shame that the things that most people would associate with Uyghur are the millions in re-education or the blatant Islamophobia or the network of forced labor camps. It's a shame because if you pick up our book and flick through its pages, you will see that we profile people from scholars to teachers to activists, artists, restaurateurs, elders, and journalists. That we have stories from those who have survived re-education camps in East Turkestan through to Uyghur youth born abroad who, because of the genocide, have never once in their lives been home. You will see that across these continents and generations, the Uyghur diaspora is united in our resistance against genocide, despite how challenging it is. And as someone who has been doing Uyghur activism for close to a decade now, I can tell you that it is so challenging to do advocacy work that draws on your deepest and ongoing trauma, and to do that advocacy work before a world that is so often indifferent and skeptical. But most importantly, to do that work knowing that the people whom you love back in East Turkestan are put at risk of torture, interrogation, and arbitrary detention because of your activism. And it breaks my heart because that experience is not unique to the Uyghur community. And so the purpose of our book is to celebrate the fact that in spite of all of these challenges, my community turns up every single day to resist genocide. And I think because that is the purpose of our book, the very essence of Uyghur resistance stands firmly in solidarity with so many communities around the world. Because so many of us are unfortunately known by the world because of what our oppressors are perpetrating against us. And so many of us as activists face this tension where we feel desperate to tell the world about the atrocities that are happening so that we can hopefully ensure the survival of our ways of life and of our identities. But at the same time, we don't want to feed into a sort of one-dimensional narrative of victimhood that flattens how rich and diverse and beautiful our peoples are. And so I think there's a lot about our book that transcends the Uyghur struggle. Something else I've been reflecting on is that so many of our oppressors throughout history use similar tactics to try and eradicate us. They criminalize our identity. They try to sever our connections to land, to language, to culture. So often, they try to justify their violence by casting us as the aggressors. So many of our oppressors are also motivated by the same thing. They see our existence as an impediment to them amassing more land and more power and more wealth. In this context, solidarity is so important because it's not about drawing parallels between the lived experiences of different communities. It's actually about recognizing that it is the same experience. It's the exact same fight. Collective liberation isn't the best or the most efficient option. Collective liberation is the only option. And when we say no one is free until we are all free, it's not because it sounds nice, it's because it's genuinely true. If the Uyghur nation was freed, but my Tibetan brothers and sisters were still suffering under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, the Uyghur nation is not free. And that's why it is so meaningful to be presenting our book to you in the context of solidarity today. Lastly, I would like to tell you all about the Uyghur language title of our book. So, as you know, the English title is Uyghur Resistance, but you probably don't know that in my mother tongue, Uyghurce, there isn't a direct translation for the word resistance. And so the Uyghur language title of our book is Bash Egmes Uygurlar, which directly translates to the Uyghur people who refuse to bend their head. And so I want to conclude by paying tribute to the generations of activists who have come before us across continents, who each embody that staunchness, that resilience, and that refusal to bend their heads. But I also want to pay tribute to all of the activists across continents who surround us, who also personify that. It is truly a pleasure to be fighting alongside you. Thank you all so much for being here. If you would like to support our project, you are more than welcome to pick up a copy of our book at our stall. Like each and every one of you, I'm sure I'm very excited to see this panel and to learn from our incredible panelists this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nuria, for grounding us in this space and your powerful work and your powerful words. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome To the stage, our panelists for Solidarity is a Verb, moderated by Sara M. Saleh. Our panelists are Plestia Alaqad, Vanessa Turnbull-Roberts, Subhi Bora, and Sara Sinada. Please make them feel welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Craig. Okay, everyone nice and cozy and comfortable? Perfect. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Darg people, the traditional custodians of this land that we're on, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I want to extend that to any First Nations people with us in the room tonight. We honor the enduring connection of First Nations people to this land, its waters, and its stories. And we also remember and honor the legacy of storytelling that has existed on this land for years and years. Tonight, we explore solidarity, survival, and resistance across communities who have experienced and are still experiencing occupation, systemic violence, and erasure. I'm honored to be joined here by 4 extraordinary advocates, journalists, storytellers. Plestia Alaqad, a Palestinian journalist and author whose reporting from Gaza has gained global recognition, including being named one of the BBC's 100 Women in 2024. Her book, Eyes of Gaza, A Diary of Resilience, documents stories of survival, hope, and resistance under occupation. Sara Sinada, a Sudanese humanitarian professional with over 15 years in conflict and crisis settings. She co-founded Media for Justice in Sudan, launching the global hashtag Keep Eyes on Sudan campaign to amplify Sudanese voices and narratives, centering gender equality, inclusion, and community-led responses. Vanessa Turnbull-Roberts, a proud Bunjalung Wijibul Waiable woman from based on Gadigal country, a human rights lawyer, a Fulbright scholar, and the inaugural 2024 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children and Young People Commissioner for the ACT. She's also the author of Long Yarn Short, exploring Indigenous identity, storytelling, and justice. Subhi, an Uyghur activist, former communications director at Gold Studio, and board member of Muslim Agenda. Subhi advocates for human rights, mothers, spirituality, and the reclamation of Uyghur culture under systemic suppression. Tonight, we'll be discussing how communities resist, survive, and show up for one another, and what meaningful solidarity looks like in practice. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, Plestia, Sara, Subhi, and Vanessa. So I might throw this out to the panel, and whoever has a burning desire to start first can. Otherwise, I will pick on someone. Between you all, your work and advocacy spans various geographies and intersections, as we've heard, from Gaza to Sudan, from occupied East Turkestan to occupied so-called Australia. How do we build true cross-solidarity beyond the hashtags and the statements? And obviously, aside from buying your books.
I'm happy to answer this one. I think the first thing we need to tackle is probably selective empathy. And realize that selective empathy, while it might not be cruelty, it is comfort. There's a lot of comfort in and ease in being in solidarity with people who look like us, who are familiar to us, whose language is familiar to ours. But it's important to recognize that everyone going through crisis deserves to be seen, regardless of their background. That's the basics of humanity. And then the second part is realizing that solidarity is not just showing up and not just showing support, it's being present. It's doing things with intention, speaking about it with intention, donating with intention. Yeah, I think that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
I'd like to I'd like to add to what you said. I feel like solidarity is about the world you want to live in. Like, do you want to live in a world where genocide is allowed, where racism is allowed? Is that a world that you want to be part of? If that's a world that you don't want to be part of, then you need to do something about it rather than wait for someone else to do something about it.
It's okay. We had a bit of a joke before that if one of us want to jump in, that we're actually just going to jump in because it's incredible women here on this panel speaking, and so no doubt it's going to go for a long yarn. Thank you so much, beautiful sister, for the introduction. Jingiwala Nogali Dugan Dugan Nogali Banjalang Wijibu Waibu. I acknowledge this country, this place in my language, and I acknowledge that I'm a visitor even as an Aboriginal woman on this place. But it's a real beautiful honour to be in this space with these beautiful women and you, my sister, so thank you. What does solidarity and I guess international solidarity look like in practice and in meaningfulness? I think the first thing that came to mind whilst agreeing with my beautiful sisters who spoke is also about who makes up the world that you are creating. So what was just shared, and if your world looks the same with every member in it, are you broadening out that world to actually think about who's missing in this place? And what are you doing? What are you doing with your heart? What are you doing with integrity? And what does real solidarity mean to actually say, I actively am prepared to show up for this, not necessarily for the short term, but for the long-term vision and the long-term game. Solidarity, particularly here in so-called Australia, we know that genocide and invasion and harm has taken place here in this country. And in this moment in time, and I will use Palestine as the reference point in this moment, is it's creating a dialogue and a conversation around, well, what's going on in this country? What's happened here? And for the first time in a long time, I'm having conversations with, with strangers and beautiful sisters and brothers across the street saying, no, actually, what's going on in Palestine? What's going on in, Rohingya? What's going on in Congo? What's going on in all these different countries and places? It's actually happening here in this country. And so solidarity is about recognizing the intersections and recognizing what does it mean to turn the mirror? What does it mean to say to our government and our leadership here, it's happening there, but it's actually happening right here as well. And I'm, old school and cheesy, but I'm a big believer in really showing up with that integrity and that heart. And people can pick someone when, again, what was mentioned earlier, if that intention's not there, that can be picked up. And we know for a fact protest is one way to show up. We know having yarns like this is another way to show up. We know that talking to your colleagues in the office is another way to show up. And it's about applying pressure in all the different places because that's where we actually see the change and the long-term movement happening. Otherwise, it becomes a trap. If we're out on the street protesting, but I can't walk into my workplace and feel safe and say, actually, this is going on with my people and this is happening and this is the reality of the world, then I'm not safe in my workplace. So it's about doing the solidarity in all different places at all different levels and being prepared to turn the mirror in where we are here in this country, the mirror in the other countries where we're seeing the violence and the pain. And then also willing to open up our hearts. Where does our integrity sit? Where does our heart sit? How can I share my heart in this moment? How can I show up in a moment, whether it is having a yarn, a cup of tea, or talking about something, or just hearing someone? I can see you speaking, but am I hearing you? That's where I think it really counts.
Thank you. Thank you so much, my sis. And Subhi, I want to know what solidarity looks like to you, and I'm interested in, whether you think it has to be, uncomfortable. What's a meaningful, tangible solidarity for us to show to Uyghurs?
I think, is this working? Yeah. I think Vanessa and mashallah, like all the women here said it so beautifully. And so many important points have been touched on. So I guess I'll focus specifically on the Uyghur people. I think solidarity with the Uyghur people, it's in an interesting spot right now. There's been, we had a peak interest in what's happening to Uyghurs, I guess in the early 2020s-ish, where there was a lot of support, from within the Muslim community, from mainstream communities. There was a lot of awareness building happening. But in more recent years, it's kind of shifted a little bit into Uyghur genocide denialism, which has been really sad for myself and for other Uyghur people to witness. And that kind of, I think, left, at least I speak for myself, feeling quite uncomfortable in a lot of, activism sorts of spaces. and speaking, publicly, about, wanting to support, Palestine and wanting to support, what's happening, the people of Sudan, and wanting to support, Indigenous brothers and sisters. And like you kind of, and then also saying alongside of that, there is a genocide happening to the Uyghur people. I found myself feeling a bit unsafe in certain spaces. So I think solidarity with the Uyghur people specifically today, it's, turning up to events like this. The existence of this event started off with, okay, we have a book about Uyghur resistance, but let's not just leave it at that. Let's open it up. Let's broaden that into solidarity, because that is where the real work is, and that's where real change will happen. When all of us who are standing up, for the things that we believe in, we will take a pause and we'll reflect on, okay, well, what are the other communities being impacted by oppression and by genocide, and how can we include them in our spaces rather than just making it about ourselves? Yeah.
I love what you said about Palestine being an access point, for example, to be able to use it to talk about other, intersectional or sort of related issues, but having the ability to discern between that and ensuring that we don't allow, for instance, countries, governments like China to launder their reputations by using Palestine, by co-opting that cause. So it's a very fine line, and I think a lot of people fall into that trap without realizing, because they're so desperate to be seen and recognized. So it's, oh, this government, Indonesia, China, whatever, they've supported Palestine, but then we forget that, well, they're enacting a genocide, or at least, brutal forms of violence against West Papuan people or against Uyghurs. So it is a challenging one, and I wanted to hear from you all as a sort of a follow-up to this question. How can solidarity also be meaningful without erasing the distinct histories and struggles of each community? And we've seen that happen where, for example, well-meaning people might use Palestinian Lives Matter because it started out as Black Lives Matter, and using that, or eyes on whatever, and it's been borrowed from another campaign. And it's my most generous read will say it's well-meaning, right? And some of them don't have the histories of the context, the struggles. How do we encourage and promote and talk about these solidarities without erasing the histories and not shrinking and being reductive? Just an easy question,
I can answer this one.
Starting you off slow.
I think the first thing that came to mind while you were talking about this was how infuriated I felt at the beginning of the war. At the beginning of the war in Gaza, I don't know if you remember. I can't remember her name, but the lady who voted against the first ceasefire in the Security Council from the American government, she was one of the first people to write a very strong article about what's happening in Sudan, and it was a really great moment to bring attention to Sudan. But you can't help but think, why now? And why this person? And I hated how Sudan was used as a distraction from what was happening in Palestine, because there was no other way to see it when you know who wrote it and when. While Sudan was being labeled the forgotten crisis, as it was and still is, as it rightly is the forgotten crisis, it was still very infuriating to see how it was almost like a zero-sum game. Solidarity is not a zero-sum game. You can focus on one crisis and another and another and another. It's work. As I said earlier, it's comfortable to feel solidarity with people that look like you, that speak your same language, that are closer to you culturally. But it doesn't have to be that way. Real solidarity is stretching this comfort to encompass people whose story is not necessarily yours, and who don't necessarily look like you or speak your language or are going through what you're going through. But it's work, and we need to put it.
I don't I don't believe in comparing struggles or comparing crises. I believe Sudan, Palestine, Congo, like any people who are struggling, really, they have different struggles, even if at some points, yes, some things are similar, but it's important to understand context. Contexts matter. And it's important to give every, how do you say qadiyya in English?
Cause?
Cause, yeah. Like it's important, thank you. It's important to understand every cause and read history about it. And yes, stand for this cause, stand for this cause. But you don't have to like combine causes just to feel like, oh, now I can feel empathy and stand with them. Like you can't do that. You need to read, you need to be educated, you need to understand. And most importantly, you need to be genuine and not a performative activist. Like show me what are you willing to lose to stand up with Palestine or Sudan. Don't show me what are you willing to gain from standing up with Palestine or Sudan. Like you know how in the streets we see many people protesting, for example, Black Lives Matter. And we see these same exact people ignoring on the sidewalks the Black people. Like they do that. So it's important really to be genuine, not a performative activist as well.
I'd like to also special mention to Candace Owens. If I see one more person share a post from her without understanding, like, I just can't deal. I mean, we can have a whole hour on that alone, but I won't interrupt you.
To add to that, for example, now that there's a, sorry for interrupting, but now that there's a ceasefire agreement, many people are posting Mahmoud Darwish's poem without even understanding. Like they're posting, now the war's over, I don't know how to speak English today, the leaders will shake hands.
Yes.
But the lady will be like, what leaders will shake hands? Like, what leaders are shaking hands right now? And what war that is over? We just don't see anything aesthetic online and we post it. It's still a genocide. There's a ceasefire, but there's an aftermath. There isn't any leaders shaking hands. We're not walking side to side with Israeli soldiers in the streets. So really educate yourself. You can start from there.
Can I jump in? Sorry, I feel like this doesn't work for the first 2 seconds. I think, speaking about posting content online, I just, like, whenever something is shared in support of a specific cause, it's interesting and it's really sad that, that same person can say, these people's lives matters, but these people's lives don't. Like it takes like a few minutes or a few seconds of just like looking into that person. What have they posted in the past? Who are these people standing in solidarity with and why? Reflecting on that. And it's so easy to just click like and share on Instagram. And I'm guilty of this myself. And then like an hour later, someone will be like, oh, by the way, this person denies the Uyghur genocide. And I'm like, oh crap, I didn't even know that myself, So this is advice to myself as well as it is to other people. When we're standing in solidarity with all these different causes, it's, naturally hard to be across all the information. And that shouldn't hold us back from wanting to stand up and say something. But when we are coming across something or someone new who's making a grand statement online, we should all take it upon ourselves to just take a minute and be like, okay, is this someone's values that I align with, and just taking that pause and then posting with thought is something really important, I think.
The flip side to Plestia's point around performative activism, sometimes you feel the pressure where I'm like, I feel really strongly and stand in solidarity with Palestinians. And I'm like, yeah, but also obviously there's stuff going on in Congo, so I want to talk about that. So I'm just going to write about Palestine and Congo. But obviously, like, I want people to know that I care about Sudan too. Like, I definitely need them to know that I'm cool and I know about Sudan. And then I'm going to talk about First Nation. And then I find myself writing this like unhinged list of half the countries of the world just in my Instagram caption, just to make sure that everybody knows that I know that they're all related and we stand with. And it feels a little bit. And it's, of course, it's genuine, right? And at the same time, you worry about that and you think about, and so I really take your points that doing things with intention, with care, understanding, like, what is the purpose? Why am I posting this right now? What am I trying to achieve? Is this performative? I think those are some really good points on how to like navigate this really tricky, overwhelming social media terrain and going to people you trust whose values align. Like, I know that if I'm gonna want to post about something, say, Uyghur related in this context, I'm generally safe to say that knowing, sharing something that you've shared, you've done your homework. Like, I can trust that, I guess, but we know each other. I do acknowledge that it's challenging. Vanessa, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about what it would look like for us to ensure we're meaningful without erasing First Nations and, especially on this continent, given the diversity of First Nations communities, protocol, ways of showing up and how it might differ from state to, country to country, I should say?
I think the first thing that came to my spirit when you asked that question was, are we telling the full story and who's telling the story? And I think genuine solidarity and making sure that it does hold credibility behind the solidarity being shown requires us to be prepared to learn that full story. And a prime example is when we have, the very own leadership of our own country saying, from October 7th, aren't we fed up of hearing from October 7th? It was pre-October 7th. We know this started a long time ago. And I think the question of how are we expecting the everyday citizen to understand the full story when we have the leadership of the nation not even prepared to tell the full story creates a really strong essence of being gaslit, creates a really strong essence of confusion, and then unfortunately creates those, similar to what was just mentioned, oh, well, I'm going through this and are you going through this? And then we create almost this false narrative of we're comparing whose genocide and whose trauma and whose violence worse. And the reality is, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And I know that's not a saying, that's a new saying that I've created. That's a saying that we're all here for a reason from different backgrounds and cultures and identities where we understand that just by default, right? So I think the first thing I think of is, are we telling the full story? Who are we potentially listening to part of the story from? So for example, the peace agreement. That's not my place to speak on. I'm not Palestinian. The only people that can speak on that and the direct impact is Palestinian people. But when we're talking about so-called Australia and we're talking about the family policing regime here, the incarceration, the interconnectedness of incarceration, the way Israel has one of the biggest imprisonment systems in the world, the way they taught what it means to take away your breath and your air with your knee on the neck, that was taught by the IDF, then I can compare that to so-called Australia and what happens here with the authorities and my people, because we have our people here dying without the use of weapons as well, through suffocations, through knees. We have our people dying in custody. We have our children and young people being removed at rates that are unbelievably disproportionate to the rest of the country. And so learn about who's telling the story, learn about where it's coming from, and then reflect on, and I say this with my full heart, that pressure to want to talk about everything will always linger at the back, but also don't put too much pressure on yourself, because there will be space, and there should be space, and in the world that we're creating, space where we can talk about all of it. We have beautiful women here from all different countries and backgrounds who have survived genocides in our own country, and what a privilege it is to be able to speak here in this moment, and then we're sharing these moments and we're sharing these conversations. So that's what I share. Who shares the story and how are we sharing
that
it?
full, powerful story. Thank you. Sara, from Sudanese, myth-making and sort of conflict narratives to cultural suppression in East Turkestan, and even indigenous colonial legacies that we learn about and that we know, each of our communities experience trauma differently. And I wanted to hear from you in particular about how you view us being able to hold space for each of the unique circumstances our struggles, currently facing. But at the same time, how do we collaborate across struggles? How do we actively build between each other, knowing that we're each of us on different front lines?
Thanks for this question. I think it's been 2.5 years since the war started in Sudan. And the main feeling that has sat with, I think, most people from the Sudanese community is feeling very unseen. So I'm really grateful for spaces like this and spaces where we're invited to, join and speak for ourselves and speak for our crisis and our trauma and what our people are going through. So I'm definitely grateful for this space. And I think solidarity doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be extremely difficult. We don't have to know every detail about every country and what's going on everywhere to be able to speak on it. I think these are obstacles that we create for ourselves that honestly just make it difficult to stand in solidarity. I think the most important thing to realize about solidarity is that every small action matters. Every little action matters. You don't have to stand in solidarity in strong, big gestures, donating big sums of money, writing essays, or learning the numbers behind the numbers of people being killed and impacted by the war in Sudan, by the hunger crisis, by everything that's happening everywhere. Just simply speaking about Sudan on your dinner table, researching it. Sitting with a group of people and saying, I don't really know what's happening. I don't know what's happening there, but I know that it doesn't sound right. And I would stand to support Sudanese people in their events, in their community events, in their initiatives. It doesn't have to be complicated, really.
Yeah, you don't need a PhD to know that genocide is wrong. There's no neutral space there. There's no both sidesing a fire and the thing that it burns, right? Plestia, in Gaza, conversely, language and narrative are very central to our survival and to resistance. And I want to hear from you about how how does reclaiming and preserving and transforming language, I mean, you're a journalist and you obviously work with words, how does transforming and preserving language help us resist erasure and assert our Palestinian identity, and in Gaza in particular, Gazan identity, especially in the context of ongoing occupation and genocide?
For decades, we had people talking about us, but rarely us talking about us. So now that international journalists weren't allowed in Gaza, it was us Gazans journalists talking about what's happening. And what I noticed is that each and every one of us made sure to call things what they are. For example, calling a genocide, not a conflict, not a war, because a war means it's between two equal powers, and that's not the case. Calling it a conflict, this is a conflict. I just hit her, she will fight with me. But calling what's happening a conflict, that doesn't make any sense. Even calling it Israel-Hamas war, I find that interesting. Like, okay, if it was Israel-Hamas war, then why are kids starving? In case they grow up and turn out to be Hamas or what? So language is important because anyone who works in the media industry knows how powerful the media industry is and how important journalism is. So it's up to these journalists at the end of the day to choose what are they going to do with this power.
Can I? Of course. I just think that's such an important point that was just made around language, because when we're given the correct language to what's actually happening, it allows the state to no longer gaslight us. And I see that in the context of my field everyday work, and I see it with the way Australia's systematic racism, child removal and incarceration system works. It calls it child protection. But how are you protecting children when our children and young people are going from being removed from families and communities and separated, which we know is one of the biggest tools of harm and violence, which is intentionally used? Because just like what was shared, you start coming for children and young people, you are ripping families and whole communities and generations apart. You're impacting the implications of revitalizing language, the coming together, the reunification. So as we see being used in Israel, the separating of children using incarceration, and what we see here with separation, if I call that child protection, then I'm gaslighting the parent of that child that's being removed. No, it's family policing. You're policing my family and you're surveillancing my family and you're surveillancing the community, and then you're taking that child away and you're saying that they are being protected when we know by fact, children and young people here in this country, the child protection system does not work for our kids. So I think language is so, so important to remove the gaslighting and to actually create the sense of anger that we have a right to feel, the frustration, and then the way we come together for our solidarity and our movement. No, it is a genocide, and it's okay to tell the truth. It's okay to tell the full story. But I think when it comes to here in Australia, the whole nation freaks out, particularly the leadership, because it's turning the mirror.
Yeah. Similar thing is when, for example, someone white does a crime, this person is mentally ill. Oh my God, he has mental health problems. But if it was an Arab, then this person would be a terrorist. If you'd like.
In terms of using the right language, I mean, the Uyghur people were being, arbitrarily detained in what we call concentration camps. But across the world, and the Chinese government has rebranded these as re-education camps. And to call it a re-education camp is so insulting. I mean, what they're doing there is, forcing Uyghur people to renounce their religion, so they can no longer, call themselves or identify as Muslim. They can no longer speak their native Uyghur language. And to suggest that Uyghurs somehow need to be educated on something to be considered, a well enough citizen to go back out into the world, it's so insulting. And it just completely minimizes the impact of what these camps are doing to the Uyghur people.
And that's why the work that you're doing is so important, because it's a way to counter, critical way to counter through culture and cultural expression, art and language, what we would call ethnic cleansing, what some might call ethnic cleansing, not re-education, that's for sure. If you wanted to.
And just to reiterate all of your points as well, you know how the war in Sudan has been labeled the forgotten crisis? This labeling through the media, using terms like this, almost makes it okay for people not to talk about it. Oh, it's okay. It's too complicated. It's very complex in Sudan. That's why it's forgotten. When in reality, it's the neglected crisis. It's not forgotten. There's so much that governments around the world can do, because it's not, again, as being labeled in the media as a civil war or a proxy war. It's way beyond that. Look at the geopolitical factors. Look at the real drivers behind this war. It's not Sudanese people.
I really dislike language that is passive and that doesn't name the agent deliberately, because it then means that you don't have anyone to hold accountable. And so I really like when people use the words like it's an invisible crisis, it's forgotten. I will say it's invisibilized. Who is invisibilized? Who is erasing this? And I think these are the sorts of questions that we need to ask ourselves when we run into these headlines, or, you know, allowing media to manufacture consent for genocide is what happens when you don't use the language and you don't name the thing that is happening as the very first, most fundamental step to stopping it, to holding it, people and the perpetrators accountable, and to be able to seek justice.
What do you think stops the naming? What do you
No,
think
I'm
stops?
the one asking the questions
we
here.
can share. Hey, we want to hear from you. What do you think? Because we hear that a lot, right? We hear that yarn about, oh, it's happening over there. It's not my problem. We're here in Australia. Like, you know, why do I have to worry about that? Like, we've got our own problems in our own backyard. Yeah, damn straight we do. But actually, I've also got siblings and community members who I love and adore and respect and honour and will stand and defend, who are, their families are facing a struggle in their backyard and their communities. So we have a responsibility here. But why do you think, what stops the human mind to be like, oh, let's worry about here, or no, we can't name it, or it's not our problem, or I don't want to call out the institution or the agent. What stops that?
I mean, I think that this is a very deliberate strategy. You know, when we have media and power aligned and conspiring to rewrite, to deliberately not name the agent, or to allow them to get away with full impunity. This is how power works. I mean, Sara, I'm interested in your view, because this is very important, particularly in the context of Sudan and Uyghur communities as well.
Yes, it's very important to look into power, privilege, and bias when we're answering a question like this. Apathy is a privilege. When the status quo serves you, it asks you to look away. It asks you not to do anything about it. So it's important to recognize that it is a privilege and refuse it. Our people have shown that standing alongside one another, treating each other's grievances like our own, lives being lost like our own, as if they're our own. Only then do you not just stand witness, only then can you change the outcome.
Subhi, Uyghur language and spiritual practice have been targeted, as you said, for erasure through these mechanisms such as these quote-unquote re-education camps. And like I said, let's call a thing a thing. That's a strategy of ethnic cleansing. How does cultural reclamation and how does storytelling help you and your community maintain spiritual and cultural identity under this systemic, you know, targeting and suppression? And how do these practices, such as, for example, the book that you've gifted us, all you collectively gifted us, how does that help us inform solidarity? How does it help us inform narratives and solidarity efforts as well, the basis for those efforts?
Well, storytelling and poetry and music are all really, really core parts of Uyghur culture. It always has been. We have something called maqam, which is a series of storytelling through music. And no one knows who wrote these songs, but they've been around for like I don't know, 1,000 years or something. And it's passed down orally, you know, from father to son and mother to daughter. And it's such a core part of Uyghur identity, and it's such a beautiful part of our culture. And some of my earliest memories growing up in an Uyghur household is listening to my father play the dutar and singing quite badly at the top of his lungs, you know, these Uyghur songs. And they all contain messages and stories and a reminder of identity and culture and religion. You know, Islam is a really important part of the majority of the Uyghur experience. And today, in East Turkestan, the Chinese government has put together very strategic policies to get rid of the Uyghur language and to get rid of the Uyghur identity. And they claim that Uyghurs are, you know, the Uyghur land has always been a part of the Chinese territory, but it hasn't. If anything, a lot of you are probably familiar with the term Xinjiang, which is a Mandarin word, which in their language, it means new territory, new frontiers. So it's an admission that this is actually new to them. It wasn't always a part of, you know, their territory. So the Chinese government has forced Uyghur people to stop speaking the language. And actually, one of the stories in the Uyghur Resistance Book contains a story of a man, an academic named Abdulwali Ayub, and he had a daughter. And in 2007, this is back in 2007, he realized that none of the kindergartens were actually speaking Uyghur as the core language anymore. Historically, they used to, you know, teach at the schools, the primary schools in Uyghur, and they would have, you know, Mandarin as one of the subjects. But he really wanted to send his children to a kindergarten with Uyghur as the main language because he wanted to pass on the culture through that means. And so he looked up the Chinese law, and it's not illegal to have, you know, kindergartens in other languages. So he went about to construct a kindergarten that teaches, you know, everything in Uyghur because it wasn't illegal. And then I think it's in 2013 or something like that, he was randomly just picked up off the street as he was going about his day and imprisoned for over a year for the simple act of creating a kindergarten to teach Uyghur children in their mother tongue on the land in which is their homeland, right? And this is our reality, you know, and it's shocking. I mean, today you'll see various influencers invited to go to East Turkestan on propaganda visits where it's like, oh, you know, Uyghur culture is so cool and stuff like that. And it's just been packaged as this Disney-like land, which looks aesthetically cool. But in reality, it completely, like, covers up the genocide that is happening to our people. So in the diaspora today, there are countless efforts to preserve our culture, to preserve our language, and our culture and our language is distinct, you know, from Han Chinese culture and language. Our language is a Turkic language. It looks like Arabic, and it's actually one of the last existing Turkic languages that are still written in the Arabic script today. You know, most other countries like Uzbekistan, for example, their language is quite similar to ours. They use the Cyrillic alphabet, or they'll use like the Latinized alphabet. So our people are, you know, kind of like the last community that are holding on to that. And it's really important to pass that on to future generations.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting, or I guess doesn't that tell you just how important and fundamental language is? Because otherwise these oppressive governments wouldn't be going after the educators, the teachers, the journalists,
and that's
the truth tellers.
That's the first people they target. They always target the academics, the poets, the journalists, you know, because they're the ones that are the truth tellers. Yeah.
And those who are often, again, naming the thing. And once you are able to articulate what the issue is, then you are able to move people into action to then, you know, dismantle it or fight against it and pursue justice and accountability and so on. I want to pick up on that thread and also something that you said earlier. Well, you asked me a question and I dodged it to Sara because, you know, I wanted to hear more from you all. But I think the answer, to put it quite simply, or one of the main issues, is not just media consent. It's media consent and manufacturing consent, rather. It's also because you have had these propaganda machines, PR machines, marketing those in power benefit because they've spent billions trying to convince you and construct this image of us, black and brown bodies, in their mind, in the wider public's mind. They have spent millions and billions, okay, to convince you of all the tropes and the stereotypes that I'm not going to repeat here, to make it easier so that when they do come for us, nobody bats an eyelid. And so the answer, pure and simple, is partly or majorly racism. And that is at the core of this settler colonial project. And racism is at the core of our various struggles. So, Vanessa, how have racism, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, Islamophobia shaped whose suffering, whose pain is recognized as credible and grievable bodies, to use Eamon McGuire's term?
Yeah, there's so much in the statement you shared, so thank you for sharing that and acknowledging what you shared, and the question as well has so many questions inside it as well. I think when I think of the media representation and who has buy-in, I think it's safe to say the current media representation doesn't actually represent the diversity, the community, the First Nations history and the truth of this country here in this country. The media is very white, so it's going to cater to the whiteness here in this land. And we know that for a fact when our biggest national broadcasting agency...
You took the words right out of my mouth. All right.
But when you have the biggest national broadcasting agency that has buy-in by the political leadership, and then we have a political leadership that doesn't actually want to tell the truth or highlight the truth, and journalism, which is totally your area, to slam, you're not going to receive the truth. And so that's where it dictates who's worthy of being grieved and who's worthy of lives mattering. I'm sure many of us may or may not have heard.
Tiny little thing called Antoinette Latouche.
Yeah, absolutely. But also the racism that we faced just a few weeks ago where camp sovereignty was attacked. That wasn't all around the media. We have white supremacists coming after Aboriginal children here in this country, actively. In my role, the first 2 weeks, I was threatened by white supremacists saying that the children that I represent and advocate for will be attacked. There was no protection afforded to me. There was no protection afforded to the children and young people. And that's the reality. And here in Australia, when we look at any single government policy or practice that is implemented, you just have to look at who's going to be impacted the most. And it will always be my people here in this country that are impacted the most. Our country here in Australia, or so-called Australia, is the testing ground for policies and practices and weapons and harm and security. And I said this at a panel the other week for No Other Land. When we look to Palestine, we know Palestinian children and young people and fathers and mothers and grandmothers, they're the lives that are tested upon. It's the biggest shareholder industry in the world. How much can this one weapon kill this many people? And that's disgusting and it's disgraceful that that's how the shareholder and the weapon industry works. But it's all profit and it's all money. So how long can we delay this genocide, make as much profit as possible, and how many people can we kill, and then how can we sell it off to all the other surrounding nations and countries to make profit of the weapons? But then we look in here in Australia, we just have to look to the Northern Territory, to New South Wales, to the ACT, to Victoria, all these different states and territories here, where security, surveillance, child removal, it's all practiced on First Nations people. And so that's when we look to our media and it fails to cover those stories. It fails to cover the stories of deaths of children in out-of-home care or the family policing system. It fails to cover the stories of Aboriginal deaths in custody here through the incarceration system. But that's part of the strategy. When there is buy-in and interconnection by the political leadership of the country and the media that has buy-in together, it'll only sell us the story that they want us to know. So then there's a responsibility for all of us here and all of us not here to be prepared to go and learn, like I shared before, learn the full story and be prepared to learn the truth. And then when you know the truth, ask your heart what you want to do with that truth. And then it's okay not to go full all in, but how far are you going to go in to stand with people and to stand on the right side of what needs to be shown and whose bodies are worthy of being shown and whose truth is worthy of being heard. And that's every single one of our communities here, your community too, Sissy, and all of the other people that have their families and communities impacted.
Yeah, fully agree. Step out of your comfort zone, the comfort of solidarity with the easy ones. Yeah, fully agree.
How do anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, racism, and Islamophobia shape who gets to be recognized as a worthy quote-unquote victim?
I think Vanessa answered it perfectly. To be honest, I've got nothing more to add. Thank you.
Would recommend my dear sister, Dr. Amy Maguire.
Yes.
Black Witness. If you're interested in black journalists here in so-called Australia, I feel like Black Witness really captures whose stories are we going to believe, which captures, murdered and missing Aboriginal women here in Australia, where some of the highest rates of family domestic sexual violence, our women fleeing, our women escaping, our women running. But we won't run to the police, we won't run for safety to the authorities. And that's for an intentional reason, because we know the life is not going to be taken as seriously as a white life. And Black Witness, shout out to Dr. Amy Maguire, just got to acknowledge my sister, would strongly encourage that as a teaching moment if you guys are keen.
Maybe we can post about that later in case people miss the names. Would you like to add anything? Plestia, I want to turn to you in light of this conversation around naming agents and accountability and so on, truth telling. As we've said, global institutions, international law, media, really masks have fallen, shown their shortcomings, to say the least, particularly in the context of Gaza. I want to ask you about how you think we need to be navigating organizations and institutions like the United Nations, like the ICC, like the ICJ, that have actually historically, to an extent, been limited, let's say limited. I'm going to use a diplomatic euphemism here and say limited in accountability. And how can meaningful liberation emerge from engaging with these systems, the ICJ, the ICC in particular?
I'm the type of person who'd always rather focus on the ones who are supporting Palestine and support them and show them that they're seen, rather than focus on the ones or the organizations who aren't doing anything for Palestine and wasting our energy talking about them. Of course, we can mention it once, twice, 3 times that yes, we do have expectations because we're all living in the same world, and yes, we do expect them to be better, to do something. But if they didn't, then let's focus on the ones who are actually doing something.
Do you feel like the ICJ and the ICC are, we should be engaging with them tactically, or that we should just not bother at all?
No, we should be engaged, but I mean engaged to a certain point.
And where would you rather we put our energy?
On the ones who are already doing something.
Palestinian organizations on the ground, is that what you mean, to
No,
clarify?
not necessarily organizations, even individuals who are doing something. We can focus our energy on them and support them and amplify their voices as well, instead of just focusing on organizations that aren't doing something. Like, it's only fair to call them out and, of course, to speak about them once, twice, 3 times, but not the whole time only talk about them. Because sometimes I feel like, for example, when Trump does a speech, he says stuff because he wants to trigger you and to be on the headlines and for everyone to talk about what he said. But instead of that being a distraction, we can also talk about what's actually happening in a way. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I want to open this up to all of you, because each of you and your respective areas of work or contributions, they reflect intergenerational strategies of resistance. Sudanese women leading crisis campaigns, the book and sort of the work in cultural preservation that you're doing for Uyghur language and communities, the children's rights advocacy and beyond. I mean, you're so staunch. You've worked in so many areas, as you've spoken to now, and Plestia with media and journalism broadly. So could you articulate or share what lessons you have each learned from your lineages, and professional, practices that help our communities survive, resist, remember, and keep fighting?
Speak your language, even if every single institution, oppressive practice, and space tries to tell you otherwise. Love your elders, like really love on your elders, look after your elders, look after your communities. And remember that in a world where there is a lot of noise and things are moving really fast and we're running and the running might be great, that the one thing that always matters is our little people, our beautiful children, and to come back to that, to come back to our children, to come back to our families, our mothers, and our beautiful communities. Because that sound is the most beautiful sound in the world, right? It means there's a child breathing, there's a child alive, there's a child speaking. So if you can go back to that and go back to our children and go back to the remembering, and I say the remembering in a cultural context, the remembering of your language. My grandmother was a slave on her own country, on her own lands. My father wasn't even considered human for more than half his life. Flora and fauna policies here in so-called Australia, where we were considered animals. Policies and legislations similar to all of our siblings here, where no, you can't speak your language, no, you're not meant to. But in the midst of intergenerational trauma, pain and harm, there's also intergenerational strength, resistance and resilience. Pemaway, Barangaroo, Truganini, Bunjalung people, Dungari people, Yuin people, people from all across these different lands are still here. We haven't gone anywhere. So speak your mother tongue and speak it proudly. And if you haven't had the ability to speak your mother tongue, go back to your communities and learn. Reach out to your elders. There will be someone there that knows something. So go back to that remembering and revitalize. We don't need consent of governments or other people to tell us that we're valid and that we matter and that we matter and that we're still here. It's here. And it's here. It's in these moments. So let's have those conversations and be proud of that. And really look after your elders and never neglect that cry, because that cry is the most beautiful cry in the world, is a child. That's their communication. So let's honor that and hold that.
To answer your question briefly, we all want to live in a better world, right? So I need to do something about it rather than wait for someone else to come and do something about it, because you're part of this world.
I really resonated with everything that you just said, Vanessa. I feel like this whole panel could just be like you, mashallah. In the Uyghur community, we have elders that have been carrying the burden of representing the Uyghur cause to anyone and everyone that they can, right? I mean, we have, there's one man who's still alive in Adelaide today. His name is Ahmed Igambadi, and he, in like the 1950s, wrote a letter to the leader of the Soviet Union saying, can you please also create a nation state for Uyghurs? Because that's when, you know, the USSR was kind of dissolving and Uzbekistan was formed, Kazakhstan was formed, things like that. And he was imprisoned for that form of activism that he did. And he's still alive today. And my dad also has always, you know, organized protests and been active in his own way. And that burden is now slowly shifting on to me and my generation and younger. And you know, and language is such an important part of it. And I feel that I haven't done enough to even preserve my own Uyghur language for my very, you know, ethnically mixed, diverse children, that I will have to pass that baton on to in their future. So yes, definitely language is such an important thing, storytelling, connecting with our elders. But I think something practical for everyone here today is firstly, be comfortable saying the word Uyghur. A lot of people, like, they might not mention it because it's hard for them to say. It doesn't roll off easily off your tongue. Even if you can't say Uyghur, like, practice saying Uyghur and just mention us and remember us in the spaces that you're in. I know everyone here today is an activist in their own right, an advocate in their own right. You know, I'm sure all of us here have been to multiple protests for various causes, and let's keep doing that and keep showing up for each other.
Thank you, Subhi. I'm very inspired by all of you, to be honest. To answer your question, Sara, thinking about Sudan, the first thing that comes to me is grassroots organizing. If there's 3 things I want people to know about Sudan now, first, of course, it's the biggest humanitarian crisis, largest displacement in the world, biggest hunger crisis. But what's more important is to think and know about the depth of the crisis and how it's impacting human lives. The second is systems have been shattered because of this war. Hospitals barely functioning, schools barely functioning, barely any teachers there, barely any doctors there. But the third and most important thing that I want people to know and remember is that Sudanese people have been standing tall. They've been supporting one another. Yes, the crisis is forgotten, neglected, ignored. Sudanese people have been rising to the occasion. humanitarian aid was cut in half. Barely any food getting to Sudan. Sudanese people have been setting up community kitchens and feeding their neighbors. There was just a recent BBC report about young people who have been traveling extremely long distances to El Fasher, which is in Darfur, West Sudan, that's under siege, and smuggling food in there, despite how difficult and life-threatening that is. And that did not start now. That's actually part of our history and our lineage. The word nafir is a word that's very unique to Sudan, and it's from yanfur, it's from jumping and rushing to help and support someone. And it's been done throughout the years. Sudan is a country that's known to face droughts and floods on a yearly basis. So it started from like my ancestors. It's from the greatest grandfather that I have heard of. They always get up and support each other when there's floods, help families, clean up, feed people. And that has continued and it has evolved and it's taken so many shapes. We've seen the feminist movement come into it and also women's ways of organizing and supporting one another. Community kitchens being set up, the emergency response rooms that were just elected for the Nobel Peace Prize. They didn't win it, but for us, they're always winners. They will forever be winners.
Can I have one brief question? Okay, great. I love that because I love that our communities will be doing the work, whether there's attention, accolades, awards, or not. And I also love how our communities have had a history of never stopped looking after each other and caring for one another, which is such a perfect note for me to segue to this final question. It's a very brief one, but I really wanted to hear from each of you. Specifically, how do each of you pay tribute to those who came before? And I want to ask you that because I think Nuria's words were so powerful earlier, and I want to thank you for that introduction. It just set the tone perfectly. So I really love those words. They resonated. Who are we paying tribute to in our work and the way that we live our lives? How are we building on those that came before? We shouldn't be forgetting the ancestors, the elders, those that have laid the groundwork for us. A lot of you are advocates who have achieved different various professions and different lines of work who have achieved firsts. But this term of like firsts is very loaded because we didn't just come out overnight. As I said, we've had communities behind us and who have gotten us here. So how do you, Vanessa, Plestia, Subhi, Sara, how do you pay tribute personally to those that have come before?
In the context of Palestine, I assume everyone already knows that history didn't start on October 7th. And for example, if it wasn't for the ones who in 1948, when the Nakba happened, if it wasn't for the ones who stayed in Palestine, then parts of it Israel would have also taken it. If, for example, my grandpa, he didn't tell me stories about the Nakba 1948, personally, I would just know about it what's online. And right now, I don't believe everything I see online, and I believe we all learned that. Because in Gaza specifically, right now, there are a lot of stuff online. For example, Hind Rajab being called a woman. And obviously we all know that she's literally a 6-year-old child. So I believe if it wasn't for the ones before us, they're the ones who drew the way for us to be here. And they're the reason we're here today and having this conversation and learning a lot. And if I want to pay my tribute, it will always be for the ones who will come after us as well, not for the ones who came before us only.
There's so many people to pay tribute to. As an Uyghur, I mean, my own grandfather, he got on a horse and rode to war, with the Chinese army back in the 1940s, the late 1940s. They were let down by the Soviet Union. But anyway, that's a story for another day. My grandmother, she was beaten to death at the hands of, Chinese soldiers during the time of the Cultural Revolution. And my father actually witnessed that. My father was sent to, forced labor camps when he was like a 6-year-old, 7-year-old. As was my mother, as was my other grandfather. All of these people, they really lived the experience of the oppression under the hands of the CCP. These are not fake stories. This is reality. This is our memory. And this Uyghur Resistance book does such a fantastic job. All credit to Sam and to Nuria and to Kate for working tirelessly on it for 5 years. A lot of people think I was on the team that created the book just because I'm on the front cover, but I wasn't. I was just lucky to be invited to be on the ride, to be a part of this book. And this book does such an amazing job just capturing these memories and putting it into something that's real, something that you can hold, something you can point to and say, this is happening and this has happened. And it's something that we can pass down to future generations. So we do this work to pay tribute to, the 9-year-old who was arbitrarily detained in a concentration camp in East Turkestan simply for learning how to read the Quran. That was his crime, learning how to read the Quran at 9-year-old, right? Like, we have to continue our language and culture and our practice of our faith. And we have to hold on to these because all of these elements make up who we are. And I hope that by holding on to that, we are going to lose things along the way, but hopefully we can pass on something tangible to our children and future generations. And I also pay tribute to my own parents. They left their country. They didn't have any idea of ever returning back home. The work that my father does today in activism and that I'm doing as well, it means that we can't ever go back. It's quite dangerous to go back to East Turkestan and to even travel through China. And so yeah, that's who we're doing it for. Yeah.
You go, Sissy.
Okay.
I'm just absorbing all of these stories and I feel incredibly inspired again. How I pay tribute to our ancestors, to our resistance over the years is just to keep shedding light on it. It's not every day that you hear stories about what's happening in Sudan and about the heroes that are on the front lines all along. And these are stories that need to be told, so I continue to pay tribute to them, show my respect to them. And whenever I speak about what's happening in Sudan and the depth of the crisis and how it impacts the lives of every single Sudanese you meet, I must also highlight the power and how Sudanese people are standing tall and supporting one another in the most dignified manner. A dignified manner that you don't see any UN agency or INGO do. And we must respect that and we must recognize that.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Beautiful, beautiful to hear, sacred to hear. I think the 2 sentences came to my spirit when you asked that question. The first one was they're remembering. So they're remembering and they're never forgetting to go back to their remembering. They're remembering of language, they're remembering of our ancestors, they're remembering of the future, which was shared. And the second one was to never seek completion. We come from the longest living culture in the world here as First Nations people here in so-called Australia. And one of the things that one of my old teachers will always share is don't seek completion because there's always more to know, there's always more to learn. And one of the ways that our old people teach us when you are connected is often you might learn a little bit, you might learn a little bit, you might learn a little bit, and we might have our own little bits. But then actually at one point we're going to have to come together and all of our different little bits are all going to connect and we're going to understand the story and we're going to understand the place and we're going to understand the meaning. So never seek completion. Always remember they're remembering and go back. Thank the land, thank country, thank those old people. Thank your elders. Love them and love on them really hard. Like even when it's super cheesy and cheeky and it's embarrassing, no shame. Shame knows no bounds. And that's one of the things that our people face quite often here in this place is that shame, that nervousness, that do I fit? Because that's how racism works. That's how strategy works. Oh, I don't fit in here. I don't belong. But actually, there's nothing more that makes our old people, ancestors more proud than remove that shame. Just come home to your country, come home to your people, and remember that we'll hold each other no matter what.
Thank you so much for such an incredibly uplifting and insightful conversation. Do you want to say something or you're done? You just wanted to hold the mic? Okay. You sure? You want to do a mic drop?
I'm just waiting for you to finish your thank you to say my thank you.
Whoa, I don't think you know how emceeing works, my friend. All right, let me say the thank yous, but I do have a couple of notes. You happy for me to, or do you want to say them? You go. Khalas, you go. Such a good conclusion too, that Plestia just, yallah.
No, we play rock, paper, scissors. Whoever wins talks first, okay?
Oh, okay, we're
Yeah.
doing this.
Yeah, we are.
On your mark, get set, go.
Rock, paper, scissors. I win, so I talk first.
So you go
Yeah, I won.
Oh yeah, so you win. You decide.
Yeah.
I picked up the paper, so I yeah.
No, seriously, I was just like waiting for her to say thank you. And I wanted to say like thank you everyone for showing up, and thank you Sam for inviting me. It's truly an honor to be like on the same panel, and it's important to learn about other causes as well, because personally the point you said about completion. Yeah. I was trying to pronounce the word. Thank you. So this is something very important, because sometimes we think we know enough, but we never know enough. So I'm so honored to be here, because I felt like today I learned a lot about different causes in the world that I thought like I already know about it. But turns out no matter how much I know, it's different when you actually listen to a person who's like one of them talking about it. And thank you so much, Sara, but like you can still continue talking, obviously. But
Well, thank you, Plestia.
but thank you so much for like being here today.
I mean, you said it way better than I did, so I might as well just
you're
quit
doing
while I'm ahead.
amazing.
I did want to say I love that, because nobody knows our histories and our stories better than we do. And so it really, I don't say this lightly, has been one of the honors of my whole life to be able to sit here with you four and listen to you and speak to you. And we could definitely go on all night, but I have it under good authority that there's some good things waiting for us outside. And I really, really want to implore everyone, please, one way you can support these incredible advocates is to right now go buy their books. Please buy their books, especially the one we are here to celebrate tonight, which is Uyghur Resistance. But also, as you heard, Plestia has her book, Diary of the Eyes of Gaza, Diary of Resilience, and we have Long Yarn Short by Vanessa. So please go buy their books. Buy one for yourself, your family. I always say this, your racist uncle, if you have one. Feel like this crowd's good, golden. Thank you so much to Muslim Agenda for helping us put this really gorgeous event together. It's so nice to spend time with you all, especially after such a challenging week. Let's put it that way. But yes, please give our incredible panelists another round of applause. Thank you so much. And enjoy your evening. Assalamu alaikum.